Okay, so I know this is SWAT team stuff right now, and because we're not meeting tonight, I'm going to dump it on you now, and we will. I will assume that you will work with this in whatever ways you find useful. We mentioned that this is a longitudinal study, and so one of the things that the longitudinal study has done is to ask the question, all right, for the kids who somehow make it through high school and into young adulthood with their faith intact, what seemed to happen? What do they have in common, these young people, that might have some bearing? They can't say causality, but there's a correlation between these. With some bearing between what your experience was in high school and the fact that you have faith now. What happened back then that set you up to be somebody who has faith now? The general movement as you get older is you tell me, more or less religious? More. You get less religious first, right? And then when you get close to dying, you get more religious, okay? That's the trajectory. Now, there are lots of exceptions to that. There are lots and lots of exceptions to that. But if you are going to find a pattern, this is the pattern. And look, there are tons of exceptions to all of these variables. But if you have patterns, this is what it looks like. So kids made the transition from high school faith to young adult faith. If these things tended to be going on, I mean, they had these in common. Their parents were religiously involved while they were in high school. Now parents are like, are you kidding me? My kids aren't listening to a thing I'm saying right now. But they're watching everything you do, right? And if you are not religiously active while your kids are teenagers, they do not have a model of what it looks like to be an adult that includes faith, right? Faith becomes an extracurricular activity that teenagers do, and it's a good thing, and they're glad they did it. But why all the models of adults they have don't practice faith? So if you are an adult that is practicing faith in the lives of teenagers, it's hugely important, even if they don't say it. Second, kids who had a high commitment to faith in high school tended to have a high commitment of faith when they were in college and beyond. Continuity is the name of the game. Where it changes, we tend to get a little less religious, at least at first. But by and large, whatever you are in high school is what you're going to be as a young adult, which says something for the importance of what you're doing right now with young people. Third, if you had a religious experience, okay, this makes Presbyterians and sociologists really nervous. Okay, I'm just saying this. We'll come back to it. But if you had some experience of God that you can name and tag as an experience of God before you graduate from high school, you are much more likely to have religious faith as an adult, a young adult. Fourth, multiple adults that you can turn to for support. And by multiple adults, we mean multiple adults of faith. I mean, they don't have to be in your church. They can be your coach or your teacher, but they have to be somebody who's not afraid to say they're a Christian, in front of you. And somebody that the kids know are living their life the way they live it because of their faith. Fifth, if you pray frequently and read the Bible as a teenager, you're more likely to have religious faith as a young adult. And last, this one really makes mainline Protestants squirm. If you have few serious doubts about your faith as a teenager, you're more likely to have faith as a young adult. We tend to view critical thinking as a spiritual gift, and I think that's correct. So we have a different view of doubt. We'll come back to that. All right, now here's the deal. What they found out was, if you have four of the six of these, you are probably going to have your faith follow you through young adulthood. Okay? But in addition to that, there were two on this list that were so powerful that they could override all the others. So this is the guessing game. You get to guess which two those are. Okay? Number one, the most important one, religious experience. Now we're going to come back to that so you don't have to have a heart attack here. Okay? But here's what we know about where teenagers experience God. They are most likely to attribute this experience to some kind of holy encounter in spaces that are liminal, like a camp or a retreat or someplace where they are suspended in between their normal realities, right? So they're pulled out of normal life for a little bit and then they're going to go back in. They're most likely to say they experience God in times of trial. When I was interviewing kids for the National Study of Youth and Religion, I heard a lot about God showing up in ways they could recognize around a grandparent's death. That was a very common story. And they are most likely to say they experience God in intense community experiences. Okay, so if you are a part of a tight-knit community as a teenager, that often is a holy experience for you. All right, so this is where we're like, well, wait a second, we can't control religious experience. How do we do that? Well, we don't, number one. But what we do are things that will help young people recognize that what's going on in their lives might have something to do with God and not just to do with happenstance. So here's the way the sociologists, because it was such a strong variable, they had to do something with it. Sociologists do not want to talk about religious experience, I promise. So what do? They define it within an inch of their lives. Here's what a religious experience was in the National Study of Youth and Religion. You make a personal commitment to live your life for God. Okay, how often do we let kids do that? Last day of camp, probably. But what if you miss camp that year? Oops. No more commitment to God for you. If they say they witnessed a miracle, or if they experienced an answer to prayer, well, you know what? How often do we give them a way to think about what's happening in their life as a possibility that God might be there helping explain this weird diagnosis that was scary a minute ago, but for some reason, now, Grandma seems to be okay. You know, is it possible God is involved in that? Raise the possibility, give them a language for that. I was on staff for Appalachian Service Project. It's, you know, like you take youth groups there. And we were in the northern Appalachian Mountains, and there was a lot of coal miners, a lot of people who, you know, were in trailers and so on. And during a snowstorm like this, a trailer had fallen, and the kids came back every summer to the same place. The trailer had fallen off its blocks. So Mrs. Busby was her name, and her two little tiny foster kids. The trailer was like this, on an angle. You couldn't keep water in a glass or on a table, and the water wouldn't stay in the toilet bowl. They lived like that from February till July, okay? When, as Mrs. Busby said, the kids would come. So when our kids came, what she said was, she told these kids, you are an answer to our prayers. And all of us, we have been praying for you to come since February. You are an answer to prayer. And all of a sudden, what they were doing, they began to think about what they were doing, not just as this good thing they were doing for this family that clearly needed it, but wow, God must be involved in this somehow. You know, that's what we're talking about. That's what we can do. Having an especially moving experience in worship, turns out that counts as a religious experience. So yeah, we'll leave that to Camille. All right. Second one, parental religious involvement. Obviously, we have a lot more control over this one. And so this is where we're going to go into some practices that we're just going to lay out there, and you can do with them what you need to. Okay? First practice. Invest in practices that deepen your own faith. You can't give what you don't have. So the most important thing we can do to help young people begin to see their lives from God's side of the clock is to invest in practices that help us do the same. There's no substitute for this. You have to put on your own oxygen mask first. You can't give what you don't have, whatever metaphor you want to use. So the questions are, how are we helping parents and other adults grow in their faith? And do kids see any difference? Does it matter? Second, share what you love. I'll have to explain the White Castle picture later. But here's what happens. We tend to share our faith as stuff that we know about God. We know that God did this or that or the other thing way back when. That's very different from sharing God as a relationship that is very active in our lives right now. So when you love somebody, we share that person with our kids naturally. You know, we want them to know the people that we know and appreciate and love. That parents do this easily. If you think about the way kids fall in love with music, it doesn't work like this. Somebody doesn't say, hey, here are a lot of facts about this band. And then the teenager goes, oh, good, I think I will now love this band and this music because of all these facts I just have. But we do that with faith. Here are all these facts about Jesus. Now, good, love Jesus. It works backwards than that. Here's somebody who has made a huge difference in my life. We learn best what we love the most. It's easy to learn what we love. So if you fall in love with a song, then you go look up all the facts about the band. So the question is Jesus someone we love or someone we know about? If we're not excited to share God with youth, why not? Third, share your own faith story with young people. Why do we follow Jesus? And it turns out that the most important faith story young people must hear is whose? Their parents. They probably have heard their pastors. They might have heard others in the congregation. But you ask parents, when was the last time you shared your faith story with your kids? Now, this doesn't roll trippingly off the tongue, right? We feel like we're crazy when we start talking about God like that. So we have to figure out ways to help parents practice sharing their faith story. So have we told young people our faith stories, and how are we helping parents share theirs? I don't know if you guys I don't know who's in confirmation or who has been through confirmation, but have you had exercises, has Rachel made you like do faith maps or anything like that, where you've had to map out your God experience? Or there are things that you do, and like you might have a testimony. Sometimes we do more of this with teenagers than we do with parents. Parents, I promise, have not had to draw a faith map in a long time. Next, emphasize good news over good behavior. This comes out of research at Fuller that found that most young people associate Christianity with not Jesus or anything holy, but with the way they act. And that allows Christianity to become what they call the Jesus jacket, which means you can take it on and put it off when you want to be a Christian and when you don't. If you want to be a Christian, when you go to church, put on your Jesus jacket. If you want to go to the party or have sex with your boyfriend, just take it off and it's all good. So what happens is we have to figure out a way to help young people think that Jesus cares about more than what they do. Jesus cares about who they are. And that means that we have to think that way too. Next, speak Christian at home. This has to do with the lack of religious language. What about, is faith only something that gets discussed in church? And how do we discuss faith? As though it's something that is a thing that we have, or is it a relationship that is dynamic and ongoing? Do we discuss faith in front of youth? Do kids hear us talk to God or just about God? Okay, the last one. This one really bears a lot of unpacking, but we don't have time for that, so here it is. I think this is the most important one. It has to matter. For it to matter to teenagers, it has to matter to you. So, do one radical thing for your faith, do it in front of your kids, and explain that you're not doing it because you're a nice person. You're doing it because this is what people who follow Jesus do. I have spent, this is just from another study, it's Southern Methodist University, the most effective way to hand on faith to the next generation is through personal testimony of religious experience. What has happened to me that I'm going to tell you about, not because you need to have it happen to you, but because I want to share this about me. Our job is to confess, not to convert, but we've got to start confessing. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to talk about this, because the stories about the radical things people do for their faith are not stories about going to Bolivia. They're stories about, parents who got up every day of a high school career to pray with their kids at 7 in the morning, rain or shine. There's stories about traveling all over the county, dumping meals on people. There's stories about getting church people to come cheer. These are all real stories I've heard. Cheer for basketball teams with kids they've never met because they're out of town and they don't know anybody. And so the churches got involved in being the cheering squad. These 80-year-old people in red t-shirts would go cheer for these kids on these basketball teams. Here's what I think might be the way to summarize how to get at that. Through Olaf. Do you know Olaf from the movie Frozen? Okay. The word radical means root. It doesn't mean extreme. Extreme means edges. That's where it's brittle and things break and it's crispy. Radical means root. It's at the root of our faith, which has to do with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which has to do with God's sacrificial love, self-giving love towards us. What kind of self-giving love have you seen? And how does Olaf say that? Do you remember this? Some people are worth melting for. So the question that we've got to figure out is, when have we seen somebody melt a little for their faith? When have they done that for us? Those stories are the stories that lodge in our being, and you all have a story like that. You have all seen somebody somewhere, a parent, a grandparent, somebody at a church, a neighbor, who you've seen melt a little for their faith, and sometimes they've done it for you. Those are the stories that change us. Those are the stories that help us begin to see that, oh my gosh, there's another side of the clock. And that's the side we live on. Thanks for coming. I'll let you guys take it.